I'm Ángel Vázquez, the presenter of this communication, together with my colleague María Antonia Manassero, the first author. The communication deals with thinking skills to transform science and technology education and their relationships to beliefs on nature of science. So, in this presentation, we have two different constructs. On the one hand, thinking skills, and on the other hand, beliefs on nature of science. So, the educational framework on thinking skills arises from the many prestigious researchers, experts, and organizations who are proposing critical thinking skills as a cross-curricular competence for learning. For instance, the European Union, the OECD, along to its 21st century and the global competency, the Partnership for 21st Century on Deep Learning, the World Economic Forum framework, the UNESCO Guiding Principles for Learning in the 21st Century, and many educational researchers that are also claiming on critical thinking skills as a transversal issue in all education. The framework on critical thinking skills comes from the cognitive psychology and educational psychology. The main thing is that critical thinking authors do not agree on a common definition for critical thinking. For instance, we have here the short and intuitive definition on Norris and Ennis as a reasonable thinking that is focused on deciding what to believe or do. So, due to this lack of consensus, many studies on critical thinking refer to the many skills that constitute the construct of critical thinking. So the field needs some kind of systematization, and we have proposed a short taxonomy for critical thinking skills, developing different categories, subcategories, and skills for this construct. The taxonomy of critical thinking skills has 4 dimensions: the creativity dimension, the reasoning and argumentation dimension, the evaluation and judgment dimension, and the complex processes. The main important thing of this taxonomy are the arrows, because thinking is an integrated process for each person. The arrows mean that all these dimensions are interrelated in the creation of thinking. This dia shows some of the categories and skills that belong to each of the 4 dimensions: creativity, reasoning and argumentation, complex processes, and evaluation and judgment. In red, we have highlighted the 5 dimensions, 5 thinking skills that we are going to consider in the empirical study of this communication: the parts-all relationship, the logical reasoning, the inductive reasoning, the argumentation reasoning, and the decision making. The main idea around this taxonomy for critical thinking is that the concept of critical thinking is foundational so it's the highest levels of the construct in the taxonomy, and the other dimensions, categories, and thinking skills are subordinated to this foundational construct. So we have some kind of hierarchy among dimensions according to their complexity. So the taxonomy puts some kind of organization across the complex world of thinking skills. The second concept involved in this communication is nature of science. To focus this concept, we can remember that as scientific and technological literacy for all has two main components: the knowledge of science and technology, which is a cognitive knowledge and involves the concepts, facts, principles, and processes that dominate textbooks and traditional teaching, and the second concept, which is the knowledge about science and technology. This is how science and technology work on scientific practice, and here we have involved concepts such as nature of science and technology, philosophical issues, epistemic knowledge, sociological issues about science, technology, and society relationships. So nature of science embodies many skills on scientific and technological practice, and this second component of literacy is the concept we are going to develop in this communication. And of course, this second concept of literacy is difficult to teach. Some of the students' difficulties to understand nature of science are the inability to differentiate facts and explanations, the inability to properly coordinate evidence, justification, arguments, and conclusions. Sometimes the students introduce opinions, inference, and personal reinterpretation, or jump to conclusions as self-evident, ignore counter-arguments or evidence contrary to their ideas, and in general students lack of elementary epistemic meta-knowledge and self-regulation. So due to this situation, some science education researchers are currently starting to connect both fields, thinking skills and nature of science, by arguing that critical thinking skills and nature of science hold a mutual relationship. On the one hand, mastery of critical thinking skill may lead to successful nature of science learning, and on the other hand, the reverse direction is also possible. The mastery of nature of science scientific skills, such as argumentation, may lead to successful learning of critical thinking skills that are important for general education. So the aim of this communication is to explore both directions of this intuitive relationship between critical thinking skills and nature of science knowledge as a fruitful ways to literacy. So the literature about this relationship is somewhat mystified. So this study aims to empirically address this relationship, exploring the correlation between nature of science knowledge and critical thinking skill, and evaluating the support to the previous theoretical claim on the relationship between critical thinking skills and nature of science knowledge. The methodology of the study involved 347 grade 8 students, half females, half males approximately, and with a mean age of 13 years. Their teacher applied the two tools as a part of the learning activities within the classroom. So the procedures involve the scoring of the students' answer to the two tools and computing Pearson correlations as the central part of this study. So the instruments are two, one for assessing thinking skills and the other one for assessing nature of science knowledge. The scenario to assess nature of science knowledge deals with different science definitions. 9, and the students are asked to agree or disagree on these 9 sentences. The sentences have been classified by experts in 3 categories: adequate, naive, and plausible. Adequate are in green 2, and naive are in red 2, and the remaining sentences correspond to plausible sentences. Adequate means they display a definition of science which experts consider adequate, and naive means definition of science that are considered by experts some kind of inadequate definition, and plausible an intermediate category for this classification. The second instrument assess critical thinking skills and is called challenges of thinking, and involve the evaluation of 5 thinking skills: explain, sequence, relationship parts all, deciding, decision making, and logical reasoning. All tests are designed free of culture. Contexts are not related nor anchored in any curricular knowledge of a school or school subject, and the correct answer receive 1 point, incorrect answer 0 points, and there are no corrections for random answers. So this is the descriptive statistic of the thinking skills, and to the right we have the reliability Cronbach alpha for these dimensions, these critical thinking skills, which is appropriate especially in those figurative items. This is the descriptive statistic for the 9 items on nature of science knowledge across the means of the 3-dimension adequate, plausible, and naive sentences. And these are the results for Pearson correlation indices between critical thinking and nature of science knowledge. Blanks are the correlation who are not significant, either positive or negative, but non-significant. So the main result here is that the adequate sentences display positive and significant relationships, while the plausible and naive sentences display mainly non-significant correlations, and some of them are significant. So 67% of the correlations between adequate phrases and skill are positive and significant, and this is the defined pattern of the relationships between nature of science and critical thinking skills. Correlate positive and significantly with nature of science and adequate phrases, and correlations tend to be negative and less significant with naive and plausible sentences. Thus, concluding, the main finding is that significant and positive relationships between thinking skills and nature of science knowledge on science definitions, referring to adequate beliefs, the unexpected non-significant or negative nature of science thinking relationships connect with the claims for balanced teaching, attention to informed as well as to misinformed nature of science knowledge and beliefs to attain effective learning of nature of science, And these findings connect science technology education with the cultivation of participatory citizens. Both thinking skills and nature of science knowledge also promote better informed and prepared citizenship for critical and active participation in society along socio-scientific learning. So further research will be needed to confirm these mixed patterns and trends of this study.